So, it's time to talk about the sexiest position in the NFL, everybody's favourite position to talk about. That's right, I am talking about offensive tackle. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So in today's video, I am going to talk about the top offensive tackles in this class, give my thoughts on all of these guys, where they stack up for me, where I'd be comfortable drafting these guys, who I wouldn't be comfortable drafting in some scenarios. Anyone that hasn't been living under a rock the last, what feels like forever, but I think it's only been a few months, you'll know what the argument has been on Brown's social media, Brown's message boards, whatever it is you get your Browns content from, whatever it is you interact with other Browns fans. I don't know if they still do dial-up, if that's how you do it. God bless you. But as I said, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the discourse has been offensive tackle versus wide receiver. You know, some people have suggested let's just take the safety. I mean, okay, that's a topic for another video. But for this video, offensive tackle, and as I said, versus wide receiver, it's been the biggest debate. Do we go wide receiver first at 6 or with a trade back and then target the best offensive tackle at 24? Do we go offensive tackle at 6 or trade back and then target the best wide receiver available at 24? If you've watched any of my videos, if you follow any of my social medias, you will know where I lie on this. If you haven't, let me explain. I am in the preference of going offensive tackle with that first pick, and the reason being is that there's 3 tackles. I say tackles, one of them I'll probably put an asterisk on that, that I would probably be more happy drafting than any of the wide receivers in this class. Another asterisk on that, unless we get a fully healthy medical report back from Jordan Tyson. That's that's speculation. Will that happen? I don't know. But as it stands right now, there's 3 guys that I would draft ahead of any of these wide receivers, and I believe that the gap between the offensive tackles that will be available at 6, or whether you trade back to 9, 10, 11, 12, I think that's a bigger gap than what guy would be available at 24 versus the receivers. If you went receiver at 6, you know, the gap between those guys available at 6 and the guys that would be available at 24. That's the reason why tackle is my preference. But it's all good me sitting here and saying tackle is my preference, whatever. But I should probably tell you why this is my preference, and I should probably give you my thoughts on these guys. So as I said, I want to talk. I'm not doing mid to late round guys in this video because I'll be honest, I'm not interested in. But let me rephrase that. The Browns have to go tackle early. If they don't go tackle in the first round, I'm not going to be very happy. And this is coming from someone that doesn't usually, kind of box myself into this kind of you have to take this position. But I just think with the players that are available this year, the guys that I like, you have to go tackle in the minimum in the first round. And in my opinion, you should go tackle with the first pick, because as I said, it's a position of need for the Browns. You've got a chance to go and get one of these guys. Let's not keep doing this. Oh, well, if we can draft someone in the 4th round and maybe they can work out. Nope, not interested. Go and get me one of these top guys. So as I said, the guys I want to talk about today, Francis Mauigoa, Spencer Fanu, Monroe Freeling, Max E. Hanatshaw, Blake Miller, Caleb Lomu, and Caden Proctor. I'm not going to spend 20 minutes on each guy. Don't worry about that. Some will probably be quicker than others. But I suppose to start, I will kind of give you an idea of where these guys stack up for me and the way that Francis Mauigoa, Spencer Fanu, and Monroe Freeling are the 3 guys that I was referencing earlier. These are, in my opinion, the three best tackles in the class. Obviously, maybe put an asterisk on Spencer Fanu. Does he end up moving to guard? That's obviously a debate to have that I will get into. But they're the three guys that I just think, as prospects, as football players right now, obviously different variations of that among them. You know, some more projections, some more ready day one. I'd feel more comfortable drafting one of those three at 6 than I would drafting any of the wide receivers. And then obviously if you can trade back as well. So let me kick it off with my guy, the guy that obviously I've had a lot of people criticising and arguing with my thoughts on this one, and that is Monroe Freeling. And Monroe Freeling, for me, when I factor everything in, and you know, as I just said, you can talk about where they're at now, the projection. I'll be honest, I think this is my offensive tackle 1. This is obviously my left tackle 1, but I just think he's my offensive tackle 1 when we're projecting these guys as tackles over Francis Mauanoa and Spencer Fanu. The reason I am big on Monroe Freeling is I've kind of developed this way of looking at offensive linemen the last few years, and you know, a combination of obviously the tape is important, you know, obviously. So, you know, a combination of the tape, a combination of where they're kind of where they are on a rise per se, shall we say. Are they someone that's profile is going up? Are they someone whose profile is going down? And then obviously the physical traits and the testing as well. And just to give you an idea of what this way of thinking results in, that is last season, where everybody was telling me that Will Campbell was the best tackle in the class, and I was 150% completely against that, and in the boat of Armand Membu being the best tackle in the class last season. I didn't even think it was a debate, if I'm being completely honest. And I think, you know, sat here now in April, just, you know, 2 weeks from the next, I say 2 weeks, under 2 weeks, nearly a week actually from tomorrow. Yeah, a week away from the draft. I think everyone can sit here and say that they would rather Membu on their team than Will Campbell. Yes, Will Campbell went to the Super Bowl with the Patriots, but in that Super Bowl kind of showed you a big reason for that. I think he had one of the worst Super Bowl performances from a tackle in Super Bowl history with the pressures that he gave up. And so I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but the point I'm trying to make is that the way that I project these guys has, you know, no more better example was last year. You look at a member, a guy that was kind of on that rise. He had don't get me wrong, played a little bit more than Monroe Freeling, but especially that last season, a great year of tape at Mizzou. And then obviously comes to the combine, tests like a freak of nature. He's got all the physical traits. He moves like a gazelle. All of that stuff factored into it, together. It was just so easy for me to project that as the best tackle in the class. And that's basically where I'm at with Monroe Freeling. Another similar guy as well, Tristan Wirfs in 2020. A kind of similar guy where it's like, well, this is maybe the projection guy. You know, is he as pro-ready as the other guys? He's got all the traits. He's got all of this stuff. But is he as pro-ready as a Jed Wills? The Browns took the more pro-ready guy in Jed Wills. And I think everyone and their nan would sit here and tell you that they would give up quite a lot to have Tristan Wirfs on this team. So that's kind of plays into a big thing of this for me. You know, Francis Mauanoa and Spencer Fanu are better football players today, right this instant. But are they going to be better football players in 3 years? I'm not so sure. Monroe Freeling, the projection for me, is why he is my offensive tackle 1. Why I would be happy, more than happy, taking him at 6. I think a lot of people would disagree with that. I'm completely understand that. That's, you know, I understand that I'm in the minority here. But this is a guy that, as I said, you know, 1 year as a starter, I understand that can be a bit of a concern for some people. But a great year as a starter, that, you know, the tape is pretty good from his 1 year starting at Georgia in the SEC, going up against the best the best edge rushers in college football pretty much week in, week out. All of the top edges this year, he's pretty much gone up against most of them. You can go and get reps from him against most of these guys. Don't get me wrong, had growing pains, of course. This guy's 21 years old, playing tackle for Georgia in the SEC. There's going to be growing pains. That is obviously more than evident in the tape. That was more than evident in even some of the field drills that we saw at the Combine. But then you look at the testing, and as I said, when you've got these guys that tick these boxes, and then they come to the Combine and they test like Monroe Freeling did at a position like offensive tackle, it just holds more weight for me than some other positions. This is a guy that came to the Combine, ran a 4.93. 4.93 at, by the way, measurement 6'7", 315 pounds. 6'7", obviously. I mean, it's don't do it, guys. Don't do it. I mean, it's you can't ask for a better height for an offensive tackle. Like if you're building an offensive tackle and a left tackle, especially in a lab, you're going to make them 6'7". The weight, obviously, to do with a little bit more weight on him. He's still only 21 years old. He's still got time to fill up that body, so I expect him to put more weight on. But as I said, those measurements with the absolute clubs of hands, he's in the 81st percentile for hand size. He's got big arms, big long arms, big wingspan. I think his wingspan is in the 99th percentile for tackles, so absolute huge specimen of a human being who, as I then mentioned, comes to the Combine, runs a 4.93, that's the 96th percentile, 33.5-inch vertical, that's the 96th percentile, broad jump, 97th percentile, 10-yard split, 171, 86th percentile. Just an absolute athletic freak at his size, and someone that, maybe dissimilar to some of the other tackles in this class that are similar size, like a Caden Proctor. He moves like a gazelle. As I said, same with Membu. This is a guy that moves so fluidly, so well. Even though he's massive, he can move his feet. It doesn't take him, like you watch someone like a Caleb Lomu versus a Monroe Freeling, or someone like a Spencer Fanu versus Monroe Freeling, and Spencer Fanu, when he's especially sliding to one side, it takes a little bit more time. They have to get it. Monroe Freeling literally takes a step and he's there. He's just absolutely huge. He moves so well. And as I said, it's a combination of everything. It's a combination of the year of tape, the projection that I see kind of tied in with the physical traits. I've so many times the last few years I've kind of stuck my flag in these kind of guys. As I said, no more than Membu last year, and every single time I've been proven right. And I'm not saying that I'm a guru. I'm not saying that I'm the offensive line guru by any means, but just when I'm thinking about that, it's so hard for me to look at Monroe Freeling and go, well, this is this year's guy. This is the guy that literally checks all of those boxes and fills that mold this year. Too many years that the Browns, these guys that I said last year with Membu, the Browns pass on and they go and become franchise tackles for other teams. I just think this is the franchise tackle, left tackle in this class, and I think whoever drafts him is getting a franchise tackle there. Don't get me wrong, as I said, there's still lots of stuff to work on. The run blocking in particular, technique wise needs some refinement, shall we say. Don't get me wrong, he can move, guys, because he's an absolute mauler, but just a little bit more refinement there, a little bit more refinement in the pass blocking as well, of course. He's 21 years old, he's a 1-year starter. Of course he has stuff to work on, but this is not someone that I believe is, you can't play him day one. I think that is just bollocks, to be honest with you. This is a guy that I would be more than happy starting at left tackle week one. Will you see some growing pains? Perhaps. You'll still see some great things as well. Monroe Freeling, as I said, just everything taken into account, I project him to be my offensive tackle number one, and that is why he is that. But as I said, I still would be happy drafting Francis Mauanoa or Spencer Fanu with that pick at 6 or maybe 12. I say Spencer Fanu, I'd feel a lot better about it with a trade back at 12. I think if we are talking about at 6, Francis Mauanoa and Monroe Freeling are the only two where I go, yeah, absolutely, completely on board with that. Whereas Spencer Fanu, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be against it. I'd be like, okay, but I would probably feel a little bit better maybe grabbing him in a trade back scenario. But Francis Mawanoa is he's the best offensive lineman in the class, arguably. This is a guy that was the best offensive lineman in college football for me. Spoke about him all year, what this guy was able to do for Miami. Every game, every edge defender he went up against, he was just, the stronger and the better guy. This is a guy that wins, not just with speed, but with technique. As I said, this is a refined football player, bit more refined than a Monroe Freeling. Which is funny to say because he is very young. I think he'll be 21 as a rookie, little bit younger than Monroe Freeling. Obviously played the tackle position a little bit longer. He's a big guy, 6'6", I think 330 pounds. So checks all the boxes for that. He does have fairly short arms. I think he's just about that 33 and a quarter threshold. So that obviously might be a concern for some people. But he's got big hands, and he's not an amazing athlete, shall we say. He's a very solid athlete. 5'1", 340, that was the 76th percentile. Vertical, 62 percentile. He actually did the free cone. Fair play to him. Was in the 54 percentile. I respect anyone that's willing to do these things. Broad jump, 69 percentile, 80 percentile in the shuttle, which is good, and then 56 percentile in the 10-yard split. So don't get me wrong, very, very solid athlete for an offensive tackle, just maybe not the kind of athletic freak that a Monroe Freeling and a Membu are, but still a very, very solid athlete. And I think the only concern or question that anyone has with Francis Mawanoa is, can you move him to left tackle? And, I think a lot of people are projecting the Browns tackle pick with, well, the guy has to play left tackle because otherwise, what's the point? I don't think that's entirely the case. Titus Howard has come out and said that he is going to play right tackle, but he can play left tackle. It's not a matter of well, that's it then. We've signed Titus Howard, so we now have to only draft left tackles. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it will be something that will come up, but I don't think it's a matter of, well, this guy played right tackle, so we can't draft him. Do you move him to the left? I don't know. That's another argument for another day. But I do think with Francis Mawanoa, not as much as Fanu, but there are some questions of, well, if it doesn't work out that well at right tackle, does he move inside? And I think, to kind of go back to my point earlier, this is why Monroe Freeling is my projected offensive tackle one. Because as I said, Francis Mawanoa, Spencer Fanu, they're better football players. They're more refined football players right now today. But they have questions in certain areas. There's questions about their ability to play left tackle. There's questions about their ability to play right tackle. Don't get me wrong, they're both good enough that if they don't work out at tackle, they'd be excellent guards. But are you drafting a guard at 6th overall versus are you drafting Monroe Freeling, which is a legitimate left tackle? This guy's not playing anywhere other than left tackle on the offensive line. So that's why Monroe Freeling is my projected offensive tackle number one over a Francis Mawanoa or Spencer Fanu. But as I said, Francis Mawanoa, in terms of the tape, best tape in the class, to be honest. Him and Fanu, very refined player, and would be absolutely more on board taking him at 6 if he's there, because this is the only tackle that I think goes before the Browns at 6, if any of them do. Francis Mawanoa, as I said, he'll be young, good athlete, good size. Maybe there's some questions about if you want to flip him to the other side. Maybe there's some questions about, well, the arms are pretty short. Does he kick inside? Those are questions for another day. I'd be happy taking Mawanoa at 6 overall, and of course would be happy taking him with the trade back. Spencer Fanu then is the interesting one, because this is a guy who just ability and tape alone is a top 10 pick. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He checks all of the boxes for the Browns in terms of the testing stuff. 6'6", 311 pounds, so pretty solid both cases there. Could obviously put on a bit more weight. Would like to see more weight as he grows into that body. But another young guy, I think 21, 22 as a rookie. But then he comes to the combine, and this is a guy that ran a 4.91, 97th percentile, 32-inch vertical, 90th percentile, free tone, 93rd percentile, broad jump, 89th percentile, the bench press, 87th percentile, the 10-yard split, 83 percentile. This guy is an athletic specimen. But the issue that I have, the issue that a lot of people have, this is an outlier. This is a guy with very short arms. This is a guy with a very short wingspan. This is a guy with very short hands. He has smaller hands than me. If, just look at my hands, do smaller hands than that concern you? If so, let me know below. But smaller hands than me at 6'6". I'm 6'2". Little bit of a concern. So that's why Spencer Fanu becomes the most kind of polarizing, interesting one here for me, because, as I said, the ability, the tape, this is an excellent offensive lineman. This is a guy that, if it doesn't work out, he played left tackle as a freshman, obviously moved over to the right side when Caleb Lomu came in. If it doesn't work out, maybe you try and move him to left tackle. I don't think you should, but maybe you should try and move him to left tackle. Doesn't work out, okay, let's move him back to right tackle. The arms become a problem at right tackle, let's kick him inside. Fuck it, your centre gets injured, let's play him at centre. This guy can play all across the line. He has positional versatility. I think he even took some reps at centre at the combine. So that is one of the... That provides a cushion, but it does also provide an argument of maybe why you wouldn't draft this guy at 6, because if I'm honest, I project him as a guard more so than... It's tough. I don't think he can't play offensive tackle, but I just think with his ability that he has, I think teams will get him in the building and go, well, this can be an all-pro guard. So why don't we just play him at guard? And that is my concern with Fanu. So that's why, he's up there with Mawanoa in terms of ability, in terms of refinement. This is one of the 2 best offensive linemen today in the class. I don't think there's any questions about that. It's just the question marks about where he plays. Does he get kicked inside? If that's the case, obviously I'm not doing it at 6. But I would be more than happy taking Spencer Fanu, in a scenario where you trade back to 12, let's say, and Francis Mawanoa, Monroe Freely, maybe they're gone. You take a Spencer Fanu. He, as I said, he checks all of the boxes. He's someone that I just know the Browns are going to like because of the positional versatility, because of the testing, because of the physical traits. But I do they get caught up on the whole kind of the arms and the hands? I don't know. Maybe they do. It's not everything for me, but it's the only reason why Spencer Fanu isn't in that kind of, I would take this guy at 6 and have absolutely no worries about it, like I have with Francis Mawanoa and Monroe Freeling, but would still be a good pick. And as I said, these 3 guys are the 3 guys that, if I'm completely honest, I'd probably be more happy taking any of those 3 than I would any of the wide receivers in this year's class, unless Jordan Tyson with a clean medical bill. So that's my thought on those top 3 guys. As I said, they are the top 3 guys for me. I had Monroe Freeling projected as offensive tackle 1. He is just someone that, as I said, I've just fallen in love with, to be honest with you, and have projected as that kind of offensive tackle 1. But Francis Mawanoa and Spencer Fanu are the best football players in this class today. If you want that kind of maybe lower ceiling but higher floor, these are your 2 guys that could be bookend starters for 10 years. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and guys that I would be perfectly happy welcoming them to this team. Then we get to the other guys, and this is where the whole kind of value game comes in, I suppose, because what chances do any of these other guys make it to 24? And do you is the gap between these guys and those 3 guys that I said at the top big enough for you to not worry about it, or is it too big? Big enough, not big enough for you to not worry about it, or too big for you to worry about it? So, Caleb Lomu, Blake Miller, Caden Proctor, and Max Iheanacho. I'm going to start with Max Iheanacho because I think he's the wild card in this. This is someone that I actually think is going to get drafted higher than a lot of people think. I think he goes in the first round, and if I'm completely honest, I think he goes before 24. I just circle the Eagles there at 23, a team that obviously did it with Lane Johnson, did it with Lane Johnson, what am I talking about? Did it with, I can't remember. brain fart guys. The tackle that played rugby that they drafted when he'd never played football before. You know, they're a team that takes those risks, takes those chances. Matt's Ian Atshaw is just such a wild card because this is a guy that in 5 years' time, I wouldn't be surprised if he's up there with those top three guys that I said, and you know, maybe even the best tackle in the class. I don't think so, but maybe he does become that because it's a guy that has all of the physical traits. I mean, he is an absolute monster. 6'6", 320 pounds, big arms, 33 over the 30. Well, I say big arms, over the threshold arms, shall we say? He's an athlete, 4'9", 140, 97th percentile. 80th percentile for vert, 97th percentile for broad jump, 80th percentile for the 10-yard sprint. And you watch the tape, and it's some of the best tape in the class. Like, this guy is bullying guys week in, week out with his frame. Don't get me wrong, he's still pretty unrefined, especially in the run game. He's pretty unrefined. But the physical traits are there. You can see what this guy can become, and that's what I see teams banking on, and that's what I see teams betting on with this guy. That's why I think he goes higher, because it's similar with a Monroe Freeling. This is a guy that checks all of the boxes in terms of the height, all of that stuff, and then also offers that, you know, not just a really good athlete, genuine, like, elite athleticism at the position. He only started playing football, I think, like 4 years ago. The biggest issue for me with Max has been the age. I have been trying to find this guy's age for about 2 months now, because, you know, people can say, you know, oh, well, it shouldn't matter that much, but when you're doing an evaluation for a guy like this, and especially in the offensive line, there's a really big difference between whether the guy is, as I said, dominating, like you saw on the tape. This guy was bullying guys. If he was doing that at 24 against 21-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 19, 18-year-olds, that's a big difference versus if he was doing that at 21, 22. I finally got a hold of his age. I think I've all but confirmed he is 22 years old. I think he'll turn 23 pretty early in his rookie season. So I think he's about a year older than the rest of these guys. Don't quote me on that. That is the best I could get from the Beast. The Beast draft guide. Maybe it comes out that, you know, he's actually a bit older. Maybe it comes out he's a bit younger. If he is 22 and a half years old, as I said, I think he goes in the first round, and I don't even think he makes it there to 24, because if you could guarantee me that he's there at 24, I would obviously feel a lot better about taking a receiver, shall we say, with that first pick. I just don't think he gets there to 24, because, as I said, I think teams are going to look at the projection, they're going to look at the athleticism, they're going to look at the size, and they're going to project this as a guy that could be one of the top tackles in this class down the line, and I think the team just takes a chance on that. I could be wrong. Maybe he goes after the Browns pick at 24. Maybe he goes in the early second round. We'll have to obviously wait and see, but I think he's kind of the wild card here. Caleb Lomu it's one of them. I mean, he's not a bad prospect by any means. You know, this guy could easily go to the Eagles at 23 if he's not there for the Browns at 24. But for me, it's just he just doesn't offer the same upside, shall we say, that the other guys do. Don't get me wrong, good size, good athlete, 6'6", 313 pounds. Not the biggest arms. I think his arms were just over that threshold. Pretty small hands as well. Pretty good athlete. 93rd percentile for the 40, 92nd percentile for the vert, 94th percentile for the broad jump. So a pretty good athlete, which just brings me more questions in some cases, because it's like, well, why is the run blocking so bad then? Like, well, I say so bad. Why is the run blocking that much worse than the pass blocking when you're as good as an athlete as you are and you have good size? Is it the small hands? Is it the smaller arms? Is it a lack of just effort? Obviously, people can make their own decisions on that. But I just think with Caleb Lomu, he's one of these guys that, like, he's a solid player. I'm not going to be surprised if he gets drafted and he has a 10-year career, makes a couple of Pro Bowls maybe, who knows. But I just don't see him ever being a top tackle in the NFL. don't get me wrong, he's the second best projected left tackle in terms of a guy that pretty much 99% is going to slot into that left tackle position. So that's why I think he probably goes higher, just because I think some teams are going to value that in this year's class. Guys that can actually true left tackles, and that's why I think Philly at 23 could be a spot for him. But I just think, you watch him next to Fanu, it's quite clear that Fanu is the better player. Whether you want to say better tackle, obviously that's a different debate. But Caleb Lomu for me is just, as I said, he's a solid player, but he's just not. I just don't think he has the traits to kind of be that top end guy. And the biggest issue for me with Caleb Lomu is the play strength, because everyone wants to talk about Monroe Freeling and talk about his play strength and he needs to fill into his body. They don't think he's strong enough, etc., etc. Don't get me wrong; it's not it's not one of the biggest things you take as his biggest strength from his game. The biggest strength from Monroe Freeling game, to me, is his technique and his footwork. But Caleb Lomu is pretty weak for a left tackle. This is a guy that I don't actually think. Everyone wants to say, I don't think you can start Monroe Freeling at week 1. If you can't start Monroe Freeling week 1, then you definitely cannot start Caleb Lomu week 1, because this guy is kind of on the weak side. There's just lots and lots of tape of this guy getting moved. There's this guy kind of getting shifted around, and obviously that's shown no more than it is in the run game, because there's quite a lot of evidence of this guy getting moved around in run blocking. And as I said, he's got good traits. He ticks boxes in terms of height. He ticks boxes in terms of he's a good athlete. I just don't think he has any of those elite traits at the position to be a guy that could become one of the better players at his position. Can he be a solid offensive tackle in the NFL? For sure. I just don't know if he's ever going to get up to strength to that point where he can be a bruiser. I just don't know if he's ever going to be able to. As I said, he doesn't really have any elite traits. So whether this guy can become one of the top players at his position, that's where I obviously have questions about. Blake Miller is another one like Caleb Lomu, where I think I'm lower on Blake Miller than others. It's easy to see why people are high on him. Ticks all the boxes in terms of this is a big dude, 6'7", 320 pounds. So, ticks all of those boxes. Arms well above the threshold. So, that's absolutely fine with that. Really good testing, really good athletic profile. 90% percentile. There we go. I got there in the end. On the vertical. 94% on the broad jump, 94% on the bench, 96% wingspan as well. So he's actually got really long wingspan, considering his arms aren't actually that long. But as I said, he ticks all of those boxes. This is a guy that's played like 50 games or something like that. He's played a lot of games for Clemson in college football. But again, it's one of these guys that, for me, he has no elite traits. He's a really... I don't think he has any elite traits, but what I do think his calling card is, and what I think will be his kind of, what gets him drafted and gets him playing early in the NFL, is his ability in pass protection, because this is a big dude that he played right tackle even at 6'7". He played pretty much exclusively at right tackle, so I'm not sure you want to move him over to the left. Obviously, you can have those conversations about that. And, with an incredible athletic profile at the position as well, this could be a guy that could be a pretty good pass protector in the NFL. Maybe even someone like a Titus Howard in certain areas. But I just think it's tough for me when I see a guy with this athletic profile. I see a guy that's played this many games, and then I watch the tape on him run blocking, and I'm like, what? Who's teaching that? It's just so unrefined. And don't get me wrong, it's not. I don't think he can never do it. I'm not saying this is a guy that you're gonna have to just take. You can only play on third down. That's not what I'm saying. But it's just odd. When you watch this guy in run protection, it's like I don't understand how this is a guy that's played all of these snaps. You would think that someone that has played as much as him would be a lot more refined at that area. This is a guy that gets moved. His footwork is all over the place. Contact rate is just terrible. He just doesn't look like he knows what he's doing in the run game. And it's just something that I can't take my edge off. And don't get me wrong, I had this argument with someone and they sent me 6 clips of him run block. You're going to find clips of him, having good reps in run protection. But just overall, when you put it all together and you look at the profile, you look at what he can do in pass protection, you look at the size, you look at the athletic profile, you look at all the games that he started, 4 years as a starter, whatever it is, playing every game. I think he missed like 1 game. And then you look at the run blocking, it's like that doesn't add up. That makes no sense. Maybe Clemson just didn't care. Maybe they weren't interested in running the ball. Maybe they weren't interested in the run blocking schemes. I don't know, but it's just something that's hard for me to kind of take away, because it's like, well, if that's the case, then what's it going to look like in the NFL? And I'm not drafting a pass protection specialist in the top half of this draft. I'll be honest, I'm not even that for drafting him at 24. He would probably be the second least of my favourites of these offensive tackles to draft at 24. It's just I can't really. I did my best to explain it there, and the only ribbon I would put on this is I don't know what it is. I just look at Blake Miller, I look at all of that stuff, and I just feel a lot lower on him than others. I could be completely wrong. I probably will be completely wrong on this, but that's just how I feel about him. And then finally, the biggest wild card of them all. That is, of course, Caden Proctor. Now, don't get me wrong. I've had some fun with this on Twitter, saying that everyone's probably seen the reports of the Browns are interested in drafting him at number 6. Number 6, apparently, they are interested in getting him. But and I've kind of had some fun of on Twitter saying that this would be an absolute disaster per se. Don't get me wrong, this would be a disaster at 6. But with that being said, he's a very polarizing player, because this is a guy that I think has the biggest chance to be the biggest bust out of any of these guys. I think he could quite easily be out of the league within 3 years. But I also think that, you kind of look at the profile, this guy could be one of the better tackles in this class if all works out. But that's the worry, is that's too much of a risk for me to take at fucking 6, especially at 6, even in a trade back scenario. The only way I would be not about Caden Proctor would be at 24. Because as I said, it's a guy that has such boom bust potential when you kind of factor in the profile. I mean, this is an absolute specimen of a human being. 6'7", 352 pounds. That's in the 100th percentile, I'm pretty sure. 76th percentile for height. Don't get me wrong, the wingspan's actually quite short and the arms aren't that long, considering he's huge. But pretty solid athlete. He ran a 5.21 at 350 fucking 2 pounds, which is quite insane. A 32-inch vertical at 352 pounds. I don't even know how that works. That's 92nd percentile. Broad jump in the 83rd percentile. Again, don't really know how that works at 352 pounds. But it's an athlete that needs to learn how to play the position. And, I was told this last year by one of my, someone that I trust more than any in the draft stuff. And they said to me, Ollie, do not buy into any Caden Proctor propaganda. This is a athlete who can't play the position. And every single time I watch him, I hear that voice in my head, and I completely understand. I think this year he did, make some strides, shall we say, in things like technique and stuff like that. But it's just, he is a wild card. This is a guy that needs a lot of refinement when it comes to pass protection. A guy that needs a lot of refinement when it comes to run blocking. Don't get me wrong, you can just line him up and move guys for now, just with his size. But in terms of gap schemes and a bit more complex schemes, it's going to need a little bit. I say a little bit. It's going to need a lot more refinement than just simple of just go and block that guy. but he can move, and this is what I mean. This is a huge guy that can move. So if you are able to get him refined to that point, he's a guy that can play in any scheme really, and I it's just one of them. I'm terrified about it, so that's why I don't want to do it, because it's the Browns. Of course, if we draft him, it won't work out. Of course, if the Steelers draft him, it will work out, and he'll be the best tackle in the class, because of course. But I do understand some people's kind of like, well, you know what, like, I understand the intrigue, because he has the base level there to work with in terms of like his technique and his ability. There's something to work with, and then you factor in the fact that he is an athletic freak. This is a guy that was, I mean, we literally saw Alabama line this guy up at running back. This guy took snaps at running back. This guy took a fucking screen pass this year. Like, he is an athlete, and so I can completely understand the intrigue in him. I just think there's, I just think when you're coming to a boom and bust guy like this, the Browns should stay way away from him, because we've all seen the history of the Browns and these guys. So that's my thoughts on those guys. As I said, I'm not an offensive tackle expert. My kind of evaluation comes from what I think I'm good at. As I said, the last few years with these kind of projections, factor in the tape, factor in the traits, factor all of that stuff in. And give my kind of best assessment on it, and of course have conversations with people that are a lot smarter than me about this stuff as well. I am going to have Jack Brentnall from the Touchdown on this weekend to talk all things draft, so looking forward to getting his opinions on these tackles as well, see where these guys line up for him compared to me. And obviously we can see maybe how far out or how far in I have been with these guys, but just to sum it up, as I said, I mean, Monroe Freeling is my guy this year, if you haven't figured that out by now. I just think this guy is a franchise tackle. I had it last year with Membu. I had it in 2020 with Tristan. I think this guy is the guy, and obviously projected as pretty much the only really top left tackle in this class, when you consider Mawanoa and Fanu. But then Mawanoa, Fanu, two really good football players, two guys that I would be happy drafting. I'd feel a lot better drafting Mawanoa at 6 than I would Fanu. But Fanu at 12, I would be all on board with that. They're the three guys that I believe are better prospects, are better fits for the Browns than any of the wide receivers that they could get at 6. I just think if you're going to do that at 6, at that premium position, you do it in one of these guys. And then if you do go wide receiver first, if you go Caleb Downs first, maybe you trade back, you go wide receiver, you get pick 20. You obviously, the next person on that list, I mean, I say next person, not the only person, maybe I'll throw Caleb Lomu in there, but Matt Silianatshaw is the only guy from that kind of second bunch that I see with that potential of becoming like one of the better players at his position in the NFL. I say that doesn't mean that Monroe Freeling is going to be a top 5 tackle in the NFL. That doesn't mean Francis Mawanoa is going to be top. But what I mean is just they have the potential to become that when you kind of factor in all of their strengths, their weaknesses, their physical profiles, the tape, all of that stuff, what you've seen from them. Just guys that I project as those kind of top tier guys. And Maxi Iheanacho is the only guy from that second bunch, other than Caden Proctor, shall I say, but a little bit sad about him, that I could see doing that. Obviously, if you do want to go for those second tier guys, Caleb Lomu, wouldn't hate it, but guys like him, Blake Miller, I just think it's a little bit more underwhelming for me. And I just, you can get a decent tackle. Maybe they do become very good tackles, but if I'm drafting a tackle in the first round, if I'm drafting a tackle high, I want these guys to at least have a chance to be one of the better players at their position. Caleb Lomu, I suppose, if you argue at 24, that's not so much the case, but that's why I would rather take tackle first in the draft, and that's kind of where I land. But as I said, that's my thoughts on all of these guys. Let me know what you guys think, where these guys stack up for you. Am I too high on Monroe Freeling? I'm sure most people will think that I am. Do you think that I'm being a bit unfair on a Blake Miller and a Caleb Lomu? Do you think they could maybe sneak into that tier 1 of guys, and they could be one of the better players of their position. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. I will do another video like this for the wide receiver class. I'm not going to do it for all the positions because I just want to do it for the wide receiver and offensive tackle, kind of give you my idea on these guys with the projection that at least one of those first round picks is going to be one of these guys. And then, as I said, I've got a conversation with Jack Brentle this week, draft expert. We'll kind of talk about other prospects, other positions that could be available here as well. But that's my thoughts on the offensive tackle class that I believe is a pretty good class and a class that I have 3 guys at the top that I would be willing to take in that top 12 range and would be willing to take over any wide receiver not named a healthy Jordan Tyson. Thank you for watching again, guys. If you do enjoy my content, please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week. Enjoy this last week leading up to the draft as we are fully entering silly season. But most importantly, go Browns.